I thought I knew everything about my father until I found old documents proving he had faked his own death decades ago. Now my brother's missing, and I'm starting to think my dad was never really gone. It all started when my dad passed away unexpectedly. Heart attack. He was only 58. The whole family was shattered, but no one took it harder than my mom. She stopped eating, barely spoke, and just sat in their bedroom for days. I tried to give her space, but eventually I had to step in. She wasn't handling any of the funeral arrangements, and my older brother Nate lived across the country in Seattle. That left me, the younger son, to take care of everything. Sorting through my dad's stuff was the hardest part. He had always been a private person, never talked much about his past, never shared personal stories like other dads. I thought maybe it was just how men of his generation were. But as I dug through his drawers, I found something that didn't make sense. It was an old shoebox hidden in the back of his closet. Inside were documents, birth certificates, social security cards, but not just his. There was one for a boy named Daniel Harris, born in 1970. I didn't recognize the name, but the birth date was familiar. It was the same as my dad's. Confused, I kept digging. There were also letters yellowed with age tied together with a string. The handwriting was neat, careful, like someone took their time writing them. The first letter started with, "My dearest Daniel, I hope you are safe. Not a day goes by that I don't think about you. If things had been different, maybe we could have stayed together. But I had to make a choice, and I hope one day you understand why." I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was writing to my dad? And why were they calling him Daniel? His name was Richard. Richard Harris, not Daniel. At first I thought maybe my dad had a twin. Maybe this was his brother's stuff. But the more I read, the less sense it made. The letters spoke about starting fresh, about a life before California. They mentioned a place called Glenwood Springs, Colorado, a town I had never heard my dad mention in my life. I sat there in his closet, my heart pounding. Could my dad have been living under a fake identity? Was Richard Harris even his real name? And if not, why would he hide something like that? I needed answers, but I had no idea how deep this would go. I barely slept that night. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of what I had found. Who the hell was Daniel Harris? Why had my dad, if that was even his real name, hidden this from us? The next morning, I called my brother Nate. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound normal. "Quick question. Have you ever heard of the name Daniel Harris?" There was a long pause, too long. "Where did you hear that name?" Nate finally asked. His voice had that edge, the kind people get when they know something but don't want to say it. "That's not important," I said, sitting up straighter. "Do you know who he is?" More silence. Then in a low voice, Nate said, "I think you should let it go." That was the wrong answer. That meant he knew something. "Nate, what the hell? Let what go? Who is Daniel Harris?" Another long pause. Then almost reluctantly, Nate said, "Look, I don't know everything, but when I was a kid, maybe 10 or 11, I overheard Mom and Dad arguing. I didn't understand much back then, but I remember Mom was crying. She kept saying, 'You're not him anymore. That life is over.' And Dad kept telling her it wasn't that simple." I felt my stomach tighten. "And you never thought to ask about it?" "I did," Nate admitted, "once when I was older. But Dad shut me down hard. He just looked at me and said, 'That name doesn't exist. Never bring it up again.'" My hands were shaking. So what? Dad was living under a fake name. Was he running from something? Was he in witness protection or something? "I don't know," Nate said. "And I don't want to know. Dad's gone, man. Just let it rest." But I couldn't. After we hung up, I went straight to my laptop. If my dad had lived a different life before California, maybe there were records. Maybe someone named Daniel Harris had existed before my dad became Richard Harris. It didn't take long to find something. A news archive from Glenwood Springs, Colorado. A scanned newspaper article from 1989. The headline made my blood run cold. "Tragic house fire claims family of 3. Son presumed dead." And below it, an old grainy photo of a young man in his late teens. Dark hair, familiar eyes. The caption read, "Daniel Harris, 19, missing after the fire, presumed dead. I stared at the photo, my heart pounding. It was my dad. I sat there staring at the screen, unable to breathe. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs describing how a tragic fire had destroyed the Harris family home on the outskirts of Glenwood Springs in November of 1989. The parents, David and Linda Harris, had died in the fire. Their only son, Daniel Harris, was presumed dead, though authorities never recovered his body. But I was looking at him. My father, Richard Harris, had the same sharp jawline, the same deep-set eyes as the young man in the photo. There was no doubt in my mind. My dad wasn't just some random guy who happened to have the same name. He was Daniel Harris. And for some reason, he had faked his death and started a whole new life under a new identity. I clicked on related articles, trying to piece things together. But there wasn't much, just mentions of how the fire was believed to be accidental, maybe a gas leak. Some neighbors said they heard yelling before the flames spread. No criminal investigation, no loose ends, just a tragic accident. But something about it felt wrong. I needed to know more. I dug through the shoebox again, looking at the letters. Most of them were vague, but one stood out. It was dated 2 weeks before the fire. The handwriting was the same careful script. "Danny, I'm begging you. You don't have to go through with this. If you leave now, you can still have a life. But if you stay, it's only a matter of time before something terrible happens." No signature, no return address. My pulse was racing. Go through with what? Leave what behind? I had more questions than answers, and I knew exactly where I needed to go to get them. Glenwood Springs. I didn't tell Nate. I didn't tell my mom. I just packed a bag, booked a flight, and the next morning I was standing outside a tiny rental car in the middle of nowhere, staring at the remains of my father's past. The old Harris house was still there, barely. It had been abandoned for decades, just a burned-out shell of a building, the wood blackened with soot. The roof had collapsed, and vines had started to take over what was left of the walls. I climbed over what was left of the fence, heart pounding, stepping carefully over fallen beams and shattered glass. And then, in what was once the living room, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Carved into the floorboards, deep and jagged, like someone had forced the knife into the wood, were 3 words. "Daniel killed them." I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. What the hell had my dad done? I couldn't move. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Daniel killed them. I told myself it had to be some sick joke, maybe some vandal messing around decades ago. But deep down, I knew better. Someone had carved that message into the floor of a burned-down house, and they had wanted it to be found. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the camera steady. Then I heard something behind me, a soft crunch, like a footstep on dead leaves. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was no one there, just the skeleton of the house and the overgrown trees pressing in from all sides. The wind rustled through the branches, but I swore I felt something watching me. I needed to get out of there. I climbed back over the fence, my mind racing. This had gone beyond some hidden past or secret identity. This was something darker, something dangerous. I got in my rental car and drove straight to the local library. If there were more answers, they'd be buried in old records, police reports, something. The librarian, an older woman with thin silver hair, gave me a curious look when I asked for newspapers from 1989. "You researching the fire?" she asked, pulling out the microfilm. I hesitated. "Yeah." She nodded, but something in her expression changed, like she suddenly wasn't sure if she should be talking to me. "A real tragedy. Poor David and Linda. And that boy, well, no one knows what really happened to him." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" She pursed her lips like she was debating whether to keep going. Then in a hushed voice she said, "A lot of folks around here didn't believe that fire was an accident. There were rumors." My throat felt dry. "What kind of rumors?" She glanced around as if making sure we were alone. "David Harris, Daniel's father, wasn't a good man. Everyone knew it. There were whispers about what went on in that house. People said the boy, Daniel, was different. quiet but troubled. And the night of the fire, some neighbors swore they heard screaming before the flames took over. A chill ran down my spine. Screaming? She nodded, like someone was begging for their life. I couldn't breathe. I thanked her and practically ran out of the library. I needed air. I needed time to think. If this was true, if my dad had really been involved in something violent, then what did that mean for the life he built afterward? For me? For Nate? For my mom? And then my phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. You should have stayed away. And attached to the message was a photo, a picture of me, standing in front of the burned house. Someone had been watching me. I froze, staring at the photo. The angle, it was taken from the trees. Someone had been watching me the whole time I was at the house. My hands were ice cold as I read the message again. You should have stayed away. My first instinct was to call the police. But what would I even tell them? That I found a cryptic message in a burned-down house about my father's supposed past? That I got a creepy text? I had no proof of anything. But I had one option left. I called Nate. Dude, listen to me, I said the second he picked up. Dad's real name was Daniel Harris. He faked his death after a fire in 1989. But I think he might have killed his parents. Silence. Nate? Then slowly he sighed. You really couldn't let it go, could you? Something in his voice made my stomach drop. What do you mean? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Mom told me, he said, his voice eerily calm. Years ago, she made me promise never to tell you. She thought you'd never dig this deep, that you'd just let Dad's past be his past. But you had to go looking. I felt like I was falling. You knew? I didn't know everything, Nate admitted. But yeah, Mom told me Dad had to change his name because of something bad. She never gave me the details, just that whatever happened back then, he had no choice but to disappear. I gripped the phone tighter. And you were okay with that? Another sigh. He was a good dad to us, a great dad. That's all that mattered to me. I wanted to scream. Nate, someone just sent me a picture of me at the house. Someone knew I was there. That made him go quiet. Then after a long pause, he said something that made my blood turn to ice. Was there a number? What? I whispered. The text. Did it come from a number, or was it unknown? I checked the message again. No number, just unknown caller. Nate exhaled sharply. Yeah, he muttered. That's what I thought. What the hell does that mean? I asked, my voice rising. Who's sending these? And then finally he said it, the words that made my entire world collapse. It's Dad. My breath caught in my throat. What? You don't get it, Nate said, his voice tight. Dad always knew this would happen. That's why he told me the truth. Why he made me promise to stop you if you ever started digging. Because the second you started looking for him, he'd know. The air in the room felt suffocating. Dad is dead, Nate. Are you sure? Nate asked. Because I thought so too, until I got the same message. My vision blurred. What? He's alive, Nate said, and he's watching us. Then my phone buzzed again, another message. You shouldn't have looked, kid. Now I have to fix this. And attached was a new photo, not of me, of Nate, standing outside his house, right now. I heard my brother's sharp intake of breath. Oh, shit! The line went dead. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notifications, and if you like this video, press like button. See you in next Deep Reddit videos.